How do you fight back against being discouraged? Like something I always go back to is after 4 years of President Donald Trump, people seeing not theoretical. What is this guy like in office? We know it now. We know he lies openly. We watched him draw with a permanent marker. We know it's just a craziness. And then 3 million more people vote for him the next election. When you see that, for me, I look at that and I said, well, now, how am I going to make an impact on these people that he himself didn't convince them not to vote for him after his behavior over 4 years? When you see something like that, we just had a recent election where Senator Todd Young of Indiana, who I have a personal grudge against because he came here after a school shooting and gave us thoughts and prayers after taking millions from the NRA, and he just got reelected by a higher margin than before. And I see that, and it just sometimes feels a little bit hopeless. How do you combat against that and keep yourself and the people that you're organizing from falling into hopelessness and despair?
I tell people all the time, especially when I think about elections in this country and democracy in general, that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And I remember something that Dr. King said. If you remember the speech that Dr. King gave the night before he was assassinated, he said, "I see the promised land. I may not get there with you." And it was almost like he knew that his life was about to end at some point soon. And so I say to people that I also see the promised land. And I understand that sometimes you and I, Rob, may not see the fruits of our labor. And even if we live long lives, we might not see the fruits of our labor. And that doesn't stop us, nor did it stop people before us from planting seeds towards the type of country that we want to live in. When we look at every generation, somebody before us sacrificed for us to be in the spaces that we are in today. When I think about even the right to vote, we went from only white men being able to vote in America to then white women being able to vote in America, then to Black men being able to vote. Then we went to, Black women and immigrants. And it's like every generation, more people were added. And at some point, there might have been people fighting for the rights of women to vote, or rights of Black women to vote, or rights of immigrants that, guess what? They themselves never voted because they might have passed or something might have happened before that law was passed. So I always say to people, I don't get discouraged because I know that whatever you and I are doing, whatever we're saying at this time, whatever we're writing is going to have an impact, so that one day when what we want happens, we could say that we were a part of that, or at least feel like we contributed to that. And there were, and especially in this recent election, yes, there were times where people like Young were reelected, but there were also times where people like, for example, Arizona just elected Katie Hobbs, and their entire legislature are Democrats now. I mean, not the entire, but the majority of the legislators Democrat. Their attorney general won her race as well. We saw more young people around the country win a public office. We had, for example, in Georgia, while we had some sad losses like Stacey Abrams, we also had the biggest Muslim delegation to ever go to a state legislature in one election. I mean, we're talking about Muslims in Georgia. 4 Muslims went all at the same time and won legislative seats in both the House and the Senate in Georgia, one of whom is a young Palestinian Muslim American young woman with a hijab that I was able to just see this past weekend in Georgia. And this is a young organizer that also got up one day and said, I'm going to organize. And she then decided that she wanted to run for office. Her first time running for office in Gwinnett County in Georgia, the largest county in Georgia. And she won her first round. Like, this is the first time she ever ran for office. So there were a lot of glimpses of hope around the country. So we might not get them in all 50 states, but to focus on places where we did win. We had great wins for Muslim Americans, and these are progressive Muslim Americans, because one thing that I will be very clear about, Rob, is I don't support people because they're Black or because they're Muslim or because they're Latino or because they're women, because I want to support people that align with my values and principles. And these people I'm telling you about are people who are pro-immigrant, pro-women, pro-refugee, pro-economy, and getting people, more economic relief. And they're winning in places you wouldn't imagine. We had Muslims win in Texas. I mean, it's just, there's too much hope for me to focus on those that are grim, like the Youngs of the world, or like looking at Florida. Like, I don't want to worry about Florida right now. I want to be able to allow us to celebrate the times where we are doing the right thing, or when things go the right way. So I say to people, don't be discouraged. Focus on when we do win. And let's look at why we won in those places and see how we can replicate that in other parts of the country. And also, Rob, we're never going to convince everybody. My goal in life is not to make sure that all Americans are all of a sudden going to all be a bunch of like progressives running around, the country. I just want to live in a country where we could have civil dialogue, right? So like if a conservative Republican, by the way, I've had these conversations that have went absolutely well, believe it or not, where when you are face to face with people, because the internet is a very dangerous place. It allows for anonymity, and it allows for a type of courage that people do not have in real life when they are face to face with you. And so I've experienced that ugly of the internet. But when I've been in spaces with people in real life, like at a college campus where the young Republicans are really upset that I came to their school, and being able to have a dialogue and say, hey, what is it about what I believe that you don't agree with? And let's talk about it. Like, don't be angry about something without understanding where I'm coming from, because I also want to know where you're coming from. And these conversations, Rob, are transformational, and I'm always ready to have them. Some people in the movement actually criticize me and say, why are you wasting your time? I said, you know what? If I talk to 10 conservatives and I can get one to say, you know what? I'm not sure if I agree with you yet, but at least I can respect you. That's all I need. I want to live in a country where we could have diverse points of views, and I don't have to worry about someone's going to assassinate me because you don't agree with me, or that I'm going to be doxxed on the internet because you don't agree with me. Doxxed, for folks that don't know, means that people put your personal information on the internet. And I am willing to have those conversations. And I think if more of us are willing, it's one of the things I advised women at the Women's March. Many folks know that a lot of the women we organized with were white women. And many of them were coming to us almost as an act of rebellion. You know, their husbands voted for Trump, their fathers voted for Trump. A lot of them did come from conservative families, and they were, like so horrified by this idea that Donald Trump had become the president. And one time, we had this really courageous conversation where I said to them, of course, having you here in the movement is wonderful. And of course, expanding our movement, expanding more people in the movement is what we need. And of course, being in solidarity with Black people and other communities that you all are not from. But I said, you know what the best form of solidarity is? What we really need you to do is we need you to go do this work in your own communities, because only people you love will listen to you before they listen to me. And so what kind of conversations or courageous conversation are you willing to have with your father, with your grandma, with your uncle, with your cousin, with your brother, and being able to give them the tools, right, and the kind of talking points to be able to debate issues like raising the wage, the idea of immigrants being able to have an earned pathway to citizenship, this idea around women's rights and women's reproductive rights. How do you talk to conservatives, especially those who are religiously conservative, about things like healthcare and women's reproductive healthcare? And that's what we told them. That's what we need people to do. I always say to people, if you're a good organizer, I know that by your family, right? How have you been able to impact and influence those that you love the most? And if more of us did that and more of us were able to have those courageous conversations, I think we would be in a better place, Rob.
I'm watching our time, it's flying by, but I can't help asking, when you're having those conversations, one pitfall I fall into is this idea that facts aren't facts on all sides anymore. If they come back with QAnon nonsense or other things, like, how do we continue this conversation? You're saying the sky is a different color than it is. There's no longer a place where we can come together and say, okay, well, because we both agree of the facts, now we can hash this out. I'm talking about reality, and you're talking nonsense.
That's right.
You have to have that faith that you're going to get there. How do you overcome that?
So I will say this, Rob, I think I should have made this disclaimer. There's certain people that I don't engage at all. There's a line for them. I don't engage outright bigots, anti-Semites, neo-Nazis, these canon type folks. Like, those are not the people I'm trying to convince. I'm trying to convince, a middle-aged white woman who grew up in a conservative Christian family, who someone told her that the immigrants came to take her jobs and to take jobs from, people like her and her children, and really getting people to go to the kind of root of why they feel the way that they feel, or women or people who talk to me about, for example, legalization of marijuana, and they're so horrified by it. They think that I'm like, give everybody drugs, get the kids on drugs, and being able to explain that legalization for marijuana is it's a criminal justice issue, and it's not really about marijuana, right? And being able to take people through that journey, right, of what it means to legalize marijuana. Marijuana is easily accessible anywhere in the country, and any one of your children can figure out how to get it. The idea here is that there are thousands of people, tens of thousands of people in our incarceration system who are there, who have their whole lives destroyed over small, doses of marijuana over the years. And Now we're legalizing it in a lot of states, and now these people are still criminalized. So being able to get people to really understand why we're pushing for these issues. When we talk about immigration and people tell me, oh, the immigrants came, and I say to people, do you know that immigrants pay taxes? Do you know that immigrants pay sales tax? Do you know that immigrants have ITIN numbers where they're also paying taxes like everybody else? But guess what? They benefit zero from that. At least we are able in the future to get a return on our taxes that we paid in the forms of Social Security and others. But guess what? Immigrants are helping to pay Social Security of today. And people don't believe, they're like, what do you mean the immigrants pay tax? I said, yeah, don't you go to the stores and pay sales tax? Yes. Well, guess what? When immigrants make purchases too, they're also paying sales taxes. And being able to, again, just kind of dispel some information. And I've had a lot of moments where, Rob, people would say, oh, I never thought about that. Oh, I didn't think about that. Or when I talk about things like, even things that are very controversial around, thinking about, raising, like, for example, in New York and North Carolina were the only two states in America where we convicted 16-year-olds as adults, right? And then we basically ran a campaign in New York called Raise the Age. And eventually, that passed, and, with some limitations, but it passed. Just being able to talk to people about the cost of incarceration. Like when people worry about their taxes, I'm like, do you know that it costs upwards of $150,000 in some states per year to house an inmate, feed them, give, all the resources that come with being, not that they're great resources, but the fact that you're just holding someone incarcerated for a year costs a lot of money. It's less than giving people access to a college education. It's less than giving them alternative services like mental health services, substance abuse services, and others. Obviously not for people who've committed egregious crimes, but crimes that are nonviolent. There's no reason why nonviolent people should be kept in a prison when there are so many other resources that we could help rehabilitate them to bring them back into community where they could be productive members of society. And people don't know these things, Rob. And I say to people, some of us have to be invested in making sure that this information gets out. So to be clear, I'm not trying to convince the super outright opposition. I'm trying to get to the people in the middle. And there's a lot of people, even Christians, where I get to talk to them about things like abortion and stuff. I'm Muslim, so they, believe it or not, I come with a little credibility because they're like, don't your people think that that's crazy? Or even when I talk about issues of LGBTQ rights, I say to people, listen, it's not about what you believe or it's about what your faith says. You believe whatever you want. You live in America. America is the land of religious freedom. But we have to all agree that everyone, including LGBTQ plus people, should live safely in our country, that they should be able to have access to jobs and access to healthcare in the same way that many of us do, and that we should not be in the business of stripping anyone of their basic rights. And at some point, people are like, yeah, like we lose nothing when we are being kind and compassionate to people, regardless of what people believe in their Bible or their Torah or their Quran. And I think if we all kind of thought in that way, we'd live in a better place. And I think people, generally speaking, when you speak to them with respect, give them an opportunity to share, you kind of share without debate. Everybody wants to go in and tell the right thing. Like, I'm right, you're wrong. I don't tell people they're wrong. I take them on a journey to get them to see for themselves that they may not be believing the right thing without having to immediately label them as you're wrong, or you know what, you believe that, guess what, you're racist. The minute you tell someone you're racist, Rob, it all goes downhill from there. Because no one wants to believe that they're racist or homophobic or Islamophobic or anti-Semitic, or being able to take people on a journey of education. Some people will reject it, Rob, and I've definitely had those experiences, but most often people are willing to listen. And I'm going to talk to the people willing to listen.